Hello and welcome to Books and the World, the longest running literary cable TV program in the country. Books and the World is a production of the Cape Cod Writers Center. I'm your host, Elisa Metcalf, and today I am very excited to welcome author Henriette Lazaridis. Her new book, fresh off the presses, is Terra. Welcome.
Thank you, Elisa. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks. So let's talk about Terra, the plot. How did this come about, this book?
It came about over my whole life, because when I was 7 years old, I saw a documentary about Robert Falcon Scott. And just yesterday, I was looking again to see if I could find footage from this actual film. But it was a series, apparently on ABC or something, that had an episode about this particular adventure, Robert Falcon Scott and his race against Roald Amundsen to get to the South Pole first in 1912. And I saw this when I was a kid and was very taken with Scott. He became my hero. I just was fascinated by this adventurer, this explorer who had done this brave thing, and he died on the way back from the pole, and he also got to the pole second. So, he wasn't, in some way, he was a very flawed leader. He made some mistakes. He didn't come home victorious. But I don't think I understood that when I was a kid.
Right, because you were young, like
I was
7
young.
or 8 years old.
I was 7, and I just thought this was cool. And I think the documentary was, was all about him. So I thought he was fantastic.
It's an interesting hero for a young child.
I know,
a
it's a
girl,
little
too.
strange, yeah. And I've been saying this. We got a dog a few months later, my first puppy, my first pet, and I named him Scotty after Robert Falcon Scott. So I was like truly taken with this and thinking about Antarctica all the time. And anytime I played out in the snow, I would think about what it must have been like. And by the time I got to be probably in my 20s or 30s, still thinking about Antarctica all the time practically, I started thinking about this question of, here's Robert Scott. He gets to the South Pole and he sees in the middle of nothing, right? There's nothing else there but Amundsen's flag. And I just kept thinking about that moment. Scott was really noble. He wrote in his diary something very stoic about, I'm very disappointed, but we have tried our hardest and we have made some mistakes, but that's okay. And he's being very, very noble about the whole thing. But what would it be really like to get there and see someone else's flag and know that, oh, you came in second, which also means you lost. And
Right.
and now you have to make a decision, really. Are you going to be noble, or no one's around? You can do whatever you want. No one else is around. So
the seeds of this,
those were the seeds.
That documentary have been growing in you all these years.
Yeah.
And at what point did you think, I'm going to write about this?
In 1993, I think it was, Beryl Bainbridge, her novel, The Birthday Boys, came out. And I jumped on it because it was about, I think the characters of that novel are Scott and the 4 other members of his polar party. And it's a great novel, but in reading it, I sort of felt it hadn't done what I would have wanted an Antarctica novel to do. Mm-hmm. And without going into the specifics of it, it sort of made me feel as though there was a book I could write. That if I really had this vision of this preoccupation with Antarctica a certain way and my own fascinations with that continent, I hadn't seen them in a novel yet. And maybe I could write that novel myself.
Well, you did, and well.
I did. Well, thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about the plot.
Yeah, so of course, when you have a character, a person like Robert Scott, who does the noble thing, and you want to explore the not noble thing, you have to invent those characters. So at some point, I decided I'm going to write this novel. I put all thoughts of Scott aside and created 2 explorers who were going to help me ask and answer that question of, like, what would you do? What would you do if you weren't ethical, if you weren't going to be noble? And so I came up with the character of Edward Haywood, who is the expedition leader, and his photographer, James Watts. And I wanted these two characters to be in this, as they are, this completely symbiotic relationship where Haywood needs Watts because Watts is creating him as a hero. Without the photographs, he's got nothing. Yeah.
Right. And it's 1910.
And it's 1910, and so they're going to, when they survive and go home, the idea is Watts is going to have the photography to present at their talks, and they're going to be able to make money off their lectures, and so Haywood needs him. And Watts, of course, needs Haywood because he has ambitions as a photographer, and without Haywood, he wouldn't have this thing to photograph. So there they go off to the pole, very much tied to each other.
And they have some history of exploration, expeditions, in the past.
Right, exactly. They're not just like put together at random. They're climbing partners. They've gone to Mont Blanc, they've gone to Snowdon in Wales, and this is all sort of not in the novel, as you know, but sort of pops up. Yeah. Right. So they go off to this exploration, this expedition, and as I was thinking of the story, I knew that I wanted a third. But two is fine, and you can do a lot with like this back and forth. It's like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It's the monster and Victor Frankenstein. They're like, they can't live with each other, they can't live without each other. That was in my mind about those men. But I wanted there to be a third person, a kind of, and here's the Greek for you, I wanted there to be like the Penelope character, who's home while the man is off having the adventures. And in the Odyssey, Penelope, she is beset by suitors who all want to marry her, and they all believe that Odysseus is gone for good. And she says, okay, fine, when I finish my tapestry, I will marry one of you. And so all day long, she weaves the tapestry, and at night, when no one's looking, she unravels it. And so she prolongs. Yeah. And that I began thinking about, if my female character, Viola, if she's going to be like the Penelope who's home, she's not just waiting. She's not just a passive character waiting.
But it's also an extraordinary wait, because it's not like they just fly down and then, hop in a boat. I mean, this is 1910. This whole expedition takes, a year?
At least. I mean, I kind of compressed it. I made it as tight as it could be for the sake of,
right. I mean,
of
they
the
take
novel.
A ship to New Zealand. Or,
yep.
And then
from there, and they have to make landfall, and then it's
so you're exhausted even before you get to the sled dogs.
Exactly.
Where you start the skiing.
Right, and there was no possibility of communication. I mean, once they leave New Zealand, she's not going to hear from them until they get back to New Zealand, which is at the whole end of it. So the whole time she's waiting, I was thinking, okay, so she needs to be an artist as well. Mm-hmm. So she's a photographer as well.
She's an amazing character.
Oh, good.
Really. I mean, and I think so pioneering for that time that she has this very open, view towards life. I mean, she's a really hard worker. She has the talent. She's a photojournalist, and she has ambitions. And let's talk about her relationship with him.
Yeah, I don't know how this happened. I mean, I was thinking I wanted there to be, and this isn't really a spoiler because you find out so early in the book that she's having an affair with Watts, and that Haywood doesn't know this, her husband doesn't know this. But I wanted it to be a little more than just, I'm cheating on my husband who I don't love. I thought, this is going to be a character who actually loves both of these men differently, as she says, and equally. And she sort of has this thing where she wrestles with this thing of, shouldn't I be able to love both men? The only trick with that is that, it's not so simple, because if she really felt that it was completely okay, I feel like she would have told Haywood.
Right.
She knows it's wrong in some level.
Well, thruppling wasn't chic then.
It wasn't a thing. It wasn't a
thing then.
Or if it was, we don't know too much about it in the history books.
But also the backstory between her and James Watts is they were boyfriend and girlfriend. They had a relationship before that didn't work out. And that in itself, that she had an unmarried relationship with this guy at that time, I mean, maybe was also kind of risky or bold on her part, and or telling of her free spirit, like, I love these two men, but I don't need them.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, is that I think she certainly doesn't believe that she needs them.
Right. So then she marries Edward Haywood, and he is this, known explorer, but I think didn't James Watts introduce them? Like after they had broken up, there's some kind of connection there.
Yeah.
So it does make sense. It doesn't, her connection to both these men and love for them didn't just kind of happen.
Right.
There's a reason for it. You can see the depth in it.
Right. What's weird for me about Terra Nova is that unlike other books that I've written, I really had in my mind when I was writing it these analogies, like Frankenstein, like Penelope, like another one is Jules and Jim, the movie. It's, oh my gosh, I can't remember, is it Truffaut? I'm blanking now, but it's a classic French cinema movie. And it is a woman and two men who she loves equally. And I haven't seen the movie in a long time, but that was in my mind too, was like, why can't she be like this? Like, why, there's three friends who are all friends together, and she's been in love with one of them first, and then the other one, but then she can't quit the first one and wants to sort of have them both.
Yeah, it does seem, organic and natural and believable.
Yeah, well, good.
But then, almost at the way down in the South Pole, after the dogs have died and they sent the other, the other explorers away because they don't have enough food for everybody.
Right.
The news comes out that James Watts is having an affair with Heywood's wife.
Right, and I wanted that little bomb to go off kind of early in the novel because then I wanted their whole time, as if it's not fraught enough, because they're running out of food and they have to get to the South Pole, and I wanted there to be this element of, like, as I think Heywood says to him at one point, if we were anywhere but here, I would kill you.
Yes, right.
And Watts has this thought that, okay, at some point, maybe when we're on the way home, he will kill me.
He's going to kill me.
When he sees the ship or when he knows that we're safe, he'll kill me.
Right. If this expedition doesn't kill me, Heywood's going to kill me.
Heywood will. So I kind of wanted that tension to be there between them and raise the stakes of now they still need each other for survival, but he also wants to kill him.
Right. Like there's not enough stakes. And by the way, let's talk about that because the way you describe the pole and the cold is so vivid and just so well done. You're shivering while you're reading it. Like what kind of experience did you have in your life that allowed you to write this so vividly?
Well, okay, so I think the coldest...
Because it's not just normal, like, Syracuse in January.
Yeah, right, that's true. Now, and I've set the expedition, of course, during the polar summer. So our winter, their summer, where the temperatures are like a horrible cold winter here, but not the insane, 50 below kind of thing that you would get in the Antarctic winter when it's dark the whole time. But still, it's awful, awful cold. I think the coldest I've ever been, I remember we were going to go skiing with my kids when they were little, and we were watching the car thermometer drop until when we pulled into the parking lot, it was 19 below. And we're like, well, we're here, let's go ski. And maybe that temperature is made up because that's like the same number that sticks in my mind for a day at Stowe during college when one of the people I was with did get hypothermic because he took his balaclava off so that he could put another hat on. And in the second he was bareheaded, he got so cold that it was like we had to take extreme measures. But so I've been around like cold from like skiing and being outside and stuff like that, but I get cold easily. So when I was writing, I would write about like how their eyelids tap together, and I was like, yeah, I know, that happens to me in my office sometimes. You get really cold if you're sitting writing for hours and hours and hours, and there's a way like your eyelids get so cold you could just like they kind of tap together. Never mind if they're frozen.
Right. Yeah, I mean, great work, just beautifully done, so cinematic. So the point of views toggle back and forth between James Watts, the
the photographer.
boyfriend, the photographer, and Viola.
Yeah, sort of close third, focusing on him and
Right.
then focusing on her.
So why not give Edward a chapter?
You know, that's the question. It's not fair, is it? Because it's not first person, which would be really unfair to Heywood, because
Right.
then he really wouldn't have a voice. But it is that sort of close third. But I think this is showing my bias that it's in a way like Watts is the representative of the men. He's photographing Heywood. He spends a lot of time watching Heywood, thinking about Heywood.
Right.
Heywood's running the show.
Well, yeah,
so
you get a really clear
he's-
picture of Heywood through Watts's eyes.
Good. Yeah,
But I
think
I was thinking, well, there's
but
only
it's
really three
true.
main characters. She could have given him at least one.
You're right. You're right.
But no, it works. It totally works.
But it's sort of
the
that
way it does.
in a way I've imposed a binary on the three. It's like I've made the
Yeah.
three into two because it's men
Right.
versus woman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it was great. And also when they're in the Arctic, I noticed the narration refers to them as Watts and Heywood. But once they get back to London and Viola, they're James and Edward.
Yeah.
Which I thought really, well, you tell me if that was intentional and what the purpose was for that.
I think it certainly came out just without much thought when I started writing. I wrote all the men's section first, and when I first started writing, that's just how they came out, last names only, and thinking that they would almost speak to each other as they often do by last name. He calls him Watts and he calls him Heywood, except occasionally they'll call each other. He'll call him James, but they don't usually use first names with each other, and so it just sort of came out kind of without much thought, and then I thought about it after and was like, yes, this makes sense to me. There's a little bit of detachment
Yes.
in how they're talking about each other and thinking about each other, but Viola, it's more intimate.
Well, it also helps you feel the cold when they're there because there's that distance, that kind of impersonalness, being
Yeah.
Watts and Heywood, and then when they get back to London where it's normal temperatures and they're back to living their life, that they are more these human, instead of just these robots who are just like hyper focused on let's get to the pole.
Yeah, I think that is that is exactly what I try to do. but I think yes, I wanted that sort of that slight formality in the Antarctica sections, even though there's so much sort of brutal physicality in just no matter how you write it, you can't get away from the fact that they're really
it does
in a brutal
add to the brutality.
Yeah.
The other thing that added to the brutality was the choice to write it in the present tense, which is jarring to read, but you get it because it really stays with you. The scenes, when you put the book down, those scenes really stay with you. I thought anyway, and I was trying to think, because at first, you don't read too many books that are written in present tense.
I guess.
And I was thinking, wow, but I don't think it would have worked as well in past tense.
Yeah, I can't think of it in any other way than present tense. To me, it was very
even
much,
in the first drafts,
yeah.
that was the choice.
Yes, the
Wow.
first. Yeah, I wrote the first draft literally with my head down, about like this, writing longhand in the dark, illuminated by the dimmest light I could tolerate.
And did you turn the heat off?
Well, kind of, because the thermostats wouldn't kick in. What I was doing is I was getting up at 5 a.m. and coming downstairs before anybody was awake, and I would make the coffee. That if I was smart, I had put it in the French press, but I wouldn't even turn the light on to see the coffee. I would use my phone flashlight to pour the hot water into the French press because I wanted to preserve this darkness,
This bleakness.
yeah, sort of like I'm in Antarctica. And I started writing, and it came out in present tense. And like with the names, or as with the names, once I had a few pages and I thought about it, this is going to stay in present tense. This is what I'm doing. There's a reason it feels right to do this, and I'm going to stick with it.
It really works, I thought. And then, Viola's scenes while she's waiting for the men in London are brighter, a little brighter.
Yeah.
But there's still that undertone of darkness. It's the women's suffrage movement. She's filming the protests, not filming, photographing.
Yeah.
And a lot of scenes too in her dark room.
Yep.
So there's more darkness.
That's right.
There.
That's right.
And the details about the process for her developing these photographs were also spectacular.
Oh,
I mean, do you have, what's your connection to photography?
I used to do a lot of photography in high school and college and a little bit in grad school, where it was, shooting film and developing it and printing it and using the enlargers and all of that. It's different when you're dealing with glass plate negatives. I think that I had to look up the chemicals that you would use for glass plate negatives, and part of me is still like, please, 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 did I get it right? I mean, I talked to some photographers about how this was done, but so I drew on my experience of my own photography in the darkroom, and tried to just make sure that it was correct for that historical time where you're dealing with, not a piece of film, but a piece of glass.
Yeah, and it lingers there for a while, how she pours the chemicals, which chemicals, and how she alters like the timing of it to zero in on certain things and highlight things in the photographs.
Yeah. There's
great.
one thing that I kind of cheated for dramatic effect, because I think anyone using a glass plate negative or a contact sheet, as you would, to try to find the right exposure, you would do one exposure where you took a piece of paper and you covered all but one strip of what you want to be the image, and you'd do like 2 seconds, and then you'd slide it over 4 seconds, 6 seconds, 8 seconds, so that you'd have this band that would show you, oh, this is what it looks like when it's had this much exposure. You would basically do them all in one, and then you would choose, oh, which one do I like the best? Oh, 6 seconds, that's the one I'm gonna go with. Right. And I don't have her do that. She doesn't make a test strip. She makes different kinds of test strips because it just felt right for the novel.
Yeah.
So.
And the art too, that her creativity, with her photographs, she's incorporating these classical art images. There's just so many different levels and little side plots and everything. It was really a fun read.
I'm
I
glad.
really enjoyed it.
I'm glad.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
So let's talk a little about you.
Okay.
What's your background?
Well, so as
you have quite an impressive resume, let's just say. So you
thank
go
you.
ahead and brag on it.
No, it's just so I grew up as speaking Greek at home, and literally my father, like the bedtime stories that he would tell me were from the Odyssey. He would sit on the edge of the bed and tell me.
Well, I was curious about that too. So you come from a storytelling background.
I guess I do.
Yeah.
Well, and my father was an engineer, but he was very, both my parents were very artistic and very athletic. And my dad, even though he was an engineer, he also had this arts side to him. And he had actually, I just remember this now for the first time in a while, he took a literature course after the Second World War with John Foles, the guy who wrote the Magus, like French Lieutenant's Woman, that John Foles. He had come to Greece and was teaching these seminars on the island of Spetses, and my father, who was in his 20s, went and took a course from this famous writer. And he actually, it was very sweet.
Did he write, your father?
No,
or it was just
no, he
on a whim?
never did. But what he did, he was a dedicated lifelong fan of John Foles. And he had this copy of Foles' novel, Daniel Martin, which is about this thick. And I think he spent about 8 years reading that book. You would always see my father falling asleep over Daniel Martin. Like the book would be open, and it had like boarding passes. He traveled a lot for work, so the book was like stuck through like a porcupine with boarding passes from all his travels. But so yeah, he loved. They were a storytelling family. My dad would tell me these Odyssey stories. My mother was she was a good storyteller, and I always loved telling stories and reading stories. And decided I was going to be a novelist. And at some point in high school, it was like, oh, yes, and I must read all the classics of American literature, and that seemed to mean Fitzgerald and Hemingway at the time. Also, John Dos Passos. My parents were Greek. They didn't know to say, like, here's who you should read. So unless I was getting it in high school, it was sort of whatever you've got, I'll read it. My dad had a Book of the Month Club subscription, and so he got Ulysses, which I don't think he knew what was going on with that book, but it was on the shelf. I'm sure he got it because, our man Ulysses. And every year I would pull Ulysses off the shelf and I would look at the first page and I would say, nope, I don't understand this yet. And I ended up being a Joyce Scholar. In my academic career, Ulysses was one of the books that I wrote about. So fast forward, I thought I was going to be a writer. I ended up going to grad school, and the master's degree led to a PhD, and then I taught at Harvard for 10 years, and somewhere toward the end of that 10-year period, I was reading a novel, which I rarely got a chance to do, to read, something for fun. And I was reading this novel, and I had this really visceral feeling of, oh my God, she made this with words. She made this with words. I was supposed to be a writer. And it really hit me that moment. It was like, what have I done? I've taken the wrong road. It's time to do a course correction. And I was eventually, it took me a couple years to kind of decide for sure that I wanted to quit academia. And I was able to stay home with my kids and write in theory full time.
Well, it was an excellent choice because,
Thank you.
Congratulations. The book is terrific. And your first novel, The Clover House, also was a bestseller, a Boston Globe bestseller.
It was.
So clearly you made the right choice in life, and I'm glad you did.
Thank you.
So unfortunately, we're out of time. I could still sit here for another 30 minutes and ask you more questions, but you'll just have to come back another time. But
All right.
Thank you, Henriette, for being here.
Thank you.
All right,
so
and
much.
thank you for watching Books in the World. To view other episodes of this program, you can go to the CapeCodWritersCenter.org.